Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The big global story we are tracking today. Syrian civilians are continuing the search for tens of thousands of people who were detained or disappeared during the decade-long civil war under Bashar al-Assad's regime. Civilians also laid to rest the bodies of an anti-Assad activist and other 30 others who were found in a hospital morgue in Damascus. The United Nations has said that more than 1 million people have been displaced since Syrian rebels launched the offensive that ousted former President al-Assad. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed concern over Israeli airstrikes on Syria and urged a de-escalation in the violence. However, Israel said its forces will remain in the Syrian territory they have seized for now. The US defended Israel's operation in Syria, saying it had a right to defend itself from security risks. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Turkish President to discuss the political transition in Syria. He asked Erdogan to ensure Syrian civilians are protected after Ankara-backed rebels overthrew the Bashar al-Assad government. Joining me to take this discussion forward is Daniel Levy, former Israeli peace negotiator and the current president of the US Middle East Project. Thank you for joining us, Daniel Levy. Let me begin by asking you what the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has been saying this is a plan that Israel and US made together to topple the Assad regime. How would you view the statements that are coming in from Iran right now and US role in what has transpired over the last 7 or 8 days in Syria?
Well, as you know, Parikshit, there are many parts of the world that lend themselves to theories of what has gone on, which are often disconnected from the reality. The sense that I have, and I think many people who are watching this have, is that undoubtedly there are a number of external actors who have significant roles that they seek to play in Syria. That isn't limited to Israel, the US. You've already mentioned Turkey. Russia and Iran themselves are engaged in Syria, of course. But the sense is that this was largely driven domestically. That many people, myself included, have been surprised at the extent to which, and we're seeing the staggering images coming out of Syria, we're seeing them on your screen, have been surprised at the extent to which the regime was hollowed out over the years of running a repressive policy towards its own people. Once Russia and Iran made the decision that they were not going to double down on a losing bet with Assad, and Assad himself had been, trying to hold the stick from both ends, if you like. Much as he had relied on Russia and Iran, he was establishing relations with countries less friendly to them. And once they decided to pull their support, once the HTS, which is the main rebel group that we've been looking a lot at, decided this was the time to make that advance, I think this was driven locally. And when the fear dissipated of the Assad regime, you see the result. And you see, let's start with this, if I may, Parikshit. This is a day of celebration for Syrians. They are uncovering more and more of what we knew, but we didn't have the evidence of the horrendous crimes of the Assad regime. But as we're seeing now, this is a day of celebration across Syria of people who are feeling that freedom, that liberation. And it warms the heart, to be honest.
Right. Very important points that there was already turmoil in Syria economically, in a humanitarian crisis that was underway as well, and external factors also contributed to the crisis. What we would also like to ask you is about the Israeli airstrikes. In the last few days, 480 airstrikes have happened on Syria from Israel. What do you think is Israel's larger plan of action right now?
Well, this is a quite remarkable, in its aggression, Israeli military airstrike action in Syria. What Israeli military analysts are saying is that this is the largest Israeli airstrike conducted ever, anywhere. That's the extent of this. And what Israel has done is that it has said, well, this is to make sure that harmful, threatening, especially chemical weapons, don't fall into the hands of potentially threatening rebels. That does not go anywhere near to explaining why this extent of action, because what has been taken out is not just suspected chemical weapons sites. And of course, you have an international organization, the OPCW. This is their job. There is such a thing as international institutions, international law. Israel tends not to put too much stock in those things and tends to act outside of the framework of international law. But that's how you deal with this. What Israel has actually done, both in the airstrikes and in seizing Syrian territory, it has laid down a marker. It has destroyed what would have been, one assumes, part of a future successor Syrian state government ability to defend its territory, including against the likes of ISIS, Daesh. So it has done a great disservice, I think, to the prospects of a smooth transition in Syria. It has undercut the potential to defend itself of the successor state, and it has seized certain territory. Now, you see America and other Western states lining up to embrace Israel's narrative and endorse what Israel has done. But you see states in the region doing the opposite because they know that in a very fragile situation in Syria, this is going to further undermine the ability to move forward with a smooth transition. And this is going to sow the seeds of further chaos. I think Israel may consider that it's sending the signal to the region: we're the new boss, we're the policeman, we're the hegemon in this region. But I think how it's being interpreted by a broad cross-section, I'm not just talking here about Iran and the axis of resistance, is even Israel's neighbors, those it has peace treaties with, those it would like to have treaties with. I think how they're interpreting this, practically, is that this is an Israel that increasingly looks like it is out of control and acting like a rogue state in the region. And I think that is a cause of concern for everyone. And many people are linking this also, of course, to the domestic politics, which can never be left out. People may know or not know that Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has been in court this week, defending himself against very serious accusations. And he would rather the story be Israel's strikes in Syria rather than him in the dock facing those charges.
Right. The big worry for the United States is a resurgence of the ISIS right now. And they are talking to Turkey. They are speaking to partners in the region to prevent that. Do you think the current transition that we're seeing, could this lead to the resurgence of ISIS in the region?
Well, Parikshit, of course it could, because we are in a tremendously fluid situation, right? And we know that Syria, there are various competing tendencies, not only the rebels that have taken the lead role, the HTS, not only the other Free Syrian Army, Turkish-backed groups, Kurdish groups, but one of those actors is Daesh. I would suggest that ISIS, that Daesh is largely contained, that they are not in a position to really take advantage of this. However, it is correct to be cautious. In being cautious and in making sure that's the case, one shouldn't undertake things that are counterproductive. So I think some of the steps, including what we just discussed, which is the Israeli airstrikes, could end up creating the circumstances of chaos which make a more conducive environment for Daesh. I think the Americans are saying that their main focus is Daesh, is ISIS, but I think what they're actually looking for is a hook, is an excuse to stay there, stay engaged. And what you really need, and the way that one will effectively counter ISIS, is that the Syrian groups themselves, the Syrian people themselves, who have lived through such an extensive period of civil war, as well as the decades of the kind of rule that we saw from Assad, the Syrian people themselves, I don't think, want to see that as their future. And that is going to be the strongest bloc against ISIS.
Right. Daniel, my final question would be about the legacy. Do you get a sense that the Biden administration has literally given Israel and Netanyahu a free hand to redraw the map of Middle East to its advantage? And could this backfire in the days to come? Is this strategy going to work?
Well, it's an appalling legacy, really, isn't it? I think this is going to go down as one of the most failed US administrations, although the competition is stiff. And the legacy that screams out more than anything else is, of course, what has gone on in Gaza, plausibly a genocide, which they have not only overseen, but they have encouraged and provided the weapons for. But in terms of this, this possibility of giving Israel free rein, I would suggest that it is a very slippery slope. One has to remember that Israel is polarized from within. Israel is already stretched in terms of its military manpower and resources. Its economy has taken a serious hit. And I think what we're seeing here is very possibly the kind of overreach or even imperial overreach, which is likely to not end well for Israel, being in Lebanon, being in Syria, being in Gaza, continuing their operations in the West Bank. I don't think this works out well for them. They have not got the capacity. They don't have the domestic solidarity and unity behind the ability to sustain this. So I think this is America not really being very helpful for Israel, to be honest.
Right. Daniel Levy, thank you so much for joining us. Clearly, there is a crisis at hand in the Middle East. Donald Trump will have a lot to do and ramifications there for India as well. That's all we have time for on this conversation. We're taking a short break on Global Eye, but coming up, it's been nearly 2 years since tensions in the Middle East began, with just a month to go for the new US government to take office. Will the outgoing President Biden manage to restore peace in the war-torn region? A special discussion with former journalist Arva Damon when we return.